Blockading a blockade. Is it the only answer the U.S. has to reopen the Strait of Hormuz? After failed negotiations in Islamabad and the price of oil still climbing, the Trump administration has chosen to further militarize the Gulf. But will more warships bring stability or push the world toward conflict? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. Well, more and more, it seems, Washington's own allies are looking for ways to maneuver around U.S. policy rather than work with it. With shipping in the Strait of Hormuz at a virtual standstill, nations desperate to secure Gulf oil supplies are forging their own paths. From South Korea to France and Spain, it's becoming clear that they're making a choice to put their own interests first, even if it costs them favored status with the Trump administration. So without allies' support, how will Trump's blockade of the Strait actually work? Here's a look.
The US has entered a game of Persian Gulf poker with Iran, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Following the failed talks with Iran in Islamabad over the weekend, the US President Donald Trump has placed a blockade on top of a blockade in the region.
Right now we have a blockade. They're doing no business. I didn't like seeing boats come out if they were doing business with Iran, but if they weren't, no boats came out. So now Iran is doing absolutely no business.
Since the war began, Iran has effectively blocked the Strait of Hormuz by attacking any ships passing through, making it so risky that the majority of shipping operators didn't attempt to run the gauntlet. But Iran began allowing ships of friendly nations to pass if they agreed to pay a toll of up to $2 million per vessel. That generated significant income for Tehran, but the US has now added another layer of threat. Trump said the US will block any ship coming from an Iranian port or any ship that has paid a toll. But it would allow freedom of navigation for ships entering the Strait of Hormuz that haven't departed from Iran or can demonstrate that their destination is another Gulf country.
They basically threatened any ship that's moving through the Straits of Hormuz. Well, as the President of the United States showed, two can play at that game. And if the Iranians are going to try to engage in economic terrorism, we're going to abide by a simple principle that no Iranian ships are getting out either.
Trump hopes that it will starve Tehran of any income it was receiving from shipping oil. Iran says the US demands are unreasonable and will continue to exercise what it feels is its right on the waterway.
Iran announced the Strait of Hormuz is territorial water for Iran and Oman. And we announced that, God willing, in the near future, we announced the mechanism of the passage of this strait.
But Tehran has pointed out that it remains open to the possibility of further talks, while rejecting the label of economic terrorism that US Vice President J.D. Vance applied to them. However, the US president's demands that other countries join in to enforce convoy escorts to open the Strait of Hormuz remain unheeded. For Trump, his high-stakes gamble could end up dealing himself and the world a losing hand if Iran succeeds in holding its ground in the standoff.
Well, joining me now to take a closer look at whether the Strait of Hormuz can be stabilized now are, from Tehran, Associate Professor of World Studies at the University of Tehran, Foad Izadi. From Madison, Wisconsin, retired U.S. Army Colonel and Distinguished Military Fellow at the Middle East Institute, Liam Collins. And from Washington, Republican strategist and lawyer Amanda Mackey. Thanks all so much for being with me. Colonel, I'll start with you. I'd like to get a military perspective here. And how difficult an operation is it to blockade the strait? Many are questioning the sheer cost of the logistics, whether U.S. aircraft carriers and ships that are already in the Gulf, which have really been stationed there for a long time already, are actually prepared for such a mission, whether they're even properly and fully maintained enough to physically enforce this blockade?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's not that hard to do a blockade there of the Iranian ports, and it's not they're not closing the strait. What it is a blockade of the Iranian ports with approximately 32 ports. 28 of them are inside the Persian Gulf. So really, you have to blockade four ports in the outside of the strait, and then the others really by blockading or closing the strait or controlling the strait. It's something that the U.S. military is trained and prepared to do at any time. With as narrow as it is there, with about 33 kilometers wide, it's not that difficult. It does take air assets, the ships that are there, as you said, ships that are already there. So in terms of expense, these ships they're at sea all the time. Aircraft pilots have to fly to maintain proficiency. So in terms of the cost, it's hard to really estimate what the actual cost is going to be beyond what it is. It's easy to measure cost of munitions, that kind of thing. But in terms of the cost, it really depends on how it goes.
So what you envision is really just the boats themselves blocking the ports, because we've heard some other analysts say that it might come down to U.S. navalmen actually storming enemy ships, and then if Iran mines the area, it could become incredibly complicated and dangerous and expensive for the United States. Plus, President Trump has actually threatened to go after specifically those who've paid a toll to Iran. But I mean, can they manage that kind of selective enforcement, I guess?
I mean, that's what a blockade is for, right? It's about maintaining selective enforcement. Typically, what you're going to do is send a warning to any ship. Then a ship may be boarded, right, and to see if it has the right credentials. And then if it doesn't, right, it's searched and determined, right, it's carrying oil or something, right, into Iran or from Iran. Then what it's going to do then becomes a challenging part, detaining the ship, rerouting it, releasing it. That's the challenge, right? If you have a Chinese ship going through there, what's the U.S. going to do there? It's very easy to actually to conduct those actions. But what do you do to a ship if it decides to try to not follow the blockade and continue going? Do you actually attack the ship? That's the biggest challenge.
And what do you think they should do?
I mean, it really depends on what their orders are. If they're really claiming and they really want to blockade a port, then you're going to have to force a stop of any ship that's trying to cross it, and you can do that with warning shots, those kind of things, to try to really make it clear to the ship captain that this is not idle talk, but they're actually mean to stop those ships.
Let me ask Fawad if you think then Iran is at a disadvantage hearing what you've just heard. Do Iranians feel that their military has the upper hand here, and that maybe they can do a lot of damage and put up a very good defense, even with far fewer resources than the U.S. military, simply because it sometimes only takes very inexpensive drones to deter massive ships from doing what they've set out to do?
I think Iranians do have an upper hand. They're defending their country. Iran was attacked illegally in February. We have lost more than 3,000 civilians. We have lost a lot of infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, 250 hospitals, 20 universities have been attacked. US and Israel were on a rampage. They're just hitting railroad stations. And Iran, the Iranian leaders were generous enough to give the other side an opportunity to see if they can find an off-ramp, stop this illegal war. Iran was attacked 2 times in the middle of negotiations, and they didn't attack Iran this time in the middle of negotiations. They just committed an act of war the next day. Blocking other countries is an act of war under international law. And if they're trying to do things to build confidence, this is not the right way to do it. If American ships get near the Strait of Hormuz, I think they will be shot at. And they can harass ships that go through the Strait of Hormuz. But I think that will result in Bab el-Mandab being closed. Gas prices in the United States will continue to go up. This is the wrong move.
Okay, and Amanda, then on that, I mean, President Trump has tried to argue that the U.S. gets very little oil out of the Gulf anyway, so it's actually China who really suffers from any blockade. But then how is the administration explaining why costs for U.S. consumers have increased so much? They're paying more for gas. Even farmers are worried about not getting needed fertilizers for crops.
Right. Well, all of these are because of the global economy and the global market for oil. So it is a farce to say just because we produce or a certain country may produce that oil prices won't rise. Of course, they rise as what happens with the entire oil market. And so, of course, in the United States right now, we're seeing gas prices. I believe oil hit over $100 a barrel today. So you know that gas prices are probably going to go up. The price of diesel here about 2 months ago, certainly before February 28th, was hovering around $3. Now it's over $6, at least in the Washington, D.C. area, I can say. So that is going to have an impact. Of course it is. That is going to impact the goods that we receive in our grocery stores and our Walmarts and our large box stores. That means the price of everyday goods goes up. Taking that a step further with the election in the horizon, not till November, but still on people's minds, certainly on the minds of members of Congress who are campaigning and are out there every day talking to their constituents. This is a difficult sell of why the price of oil has gone up, why we're engaged in the Middle East. And as this drags on, as this goes longer and longer beyond the 4 to 6 week threshold that President Trump had certainly talked about in the beginning, people do get uncomfortable with it, and certainly members of Congress have a hard time selling it. So you see the president is pivoting to other things right now because this is not a good it's not a good talking point, obviously.
And Amanda, you've just said why it's actually not looking good at all then for the U.S. consumer or for the president. This isn't going well.
Well, I would say that the prices certainly aren't, but you know, some people are of the mindset, and certainly someone who was born in Iran like myself, and you see in the Iranian diaspora, we are all so glad that something is happening to liberate the Iranian people from this oppressive regime. You know, Foad talks about the 2 or 3,000 people that have died under this regime. 30 to 40,000 of their own people were massacred.
But Amanda, that
in
is
January
a
alone. This is a regime
minuscule proportion of the U.S. population here. You know, trying to say, well, the Iranian diaspora feels good about this. That's not what the administration really.
No, I think the Iranian people, I'd say a majority of the Iranian people feel very good about this. The people that I've talked to that are my relatives in Iran are happy that this is happening.
Okay, but that, I
Of
mean,
course, no one wants to see death or destruction, but we also can't let this regime stay in place.
Okay.
And that's where the issue lies.
Okay, let me come back to the Colonel, because there's the issue now of how the U.S. has arguably alienated its allies. So do you fear that U.S. allies are now seeking to really avoid including the United States in any of their foreign policy decisions? We have to remember that most did break ranks with the U.S. over the war in Iraq, not the UK, but most European allies did. And history proved them right, more or less. So now you have the UK also saying no. Are the U.S. and Israel not factoring into foreign policy decisions among their own allies anymore? Does that concern you?
No, I mean, without a doubt, like you said, you brought up the example, right, during the Iraq War when the U.S. mostly went it alone. Yeah, it angered the allies, but allies have different interests, different security interests. And so, you know, just like, you know, friends the same way, right? Your friends may anger you, but they're still your friends. The same thing applies here in international relations, right? The allies, we aren't always aligned on everything. But, you know, who else are they going to turn to? NATO, or I mean, a NATO nation going to turn to, or a Gulf state? Are they going to turn to Iran? Clearly not. China or Russia? That's not where they want to go. So, yeah. I mean, they still have most of their interests are aligned if they're not aligned on this issue. So I'm not worried about long-term harm in that regard. Okay.
What about just the U.S. position, really? people are saying that the U.S. may not be the superpower that it once was as a result of all this. Is the United States really comfortable with that?
I mean, if you look, I mean, even being a superpower, right? I mean, it doesn't mean that you can exercise anything that you want to do. The war in Iraq obviously didn't go exactly as the U.S. planned. Neither did the war in Afghanistan. So even being a superpower, it doesn't mean you can do anything and everything. And so the U.S., has to understand what its limitations and capabilities are, and preferably and always better to go at it, right, as a large conglomerate of a coalition. When you're not able to, it does limit your capability to some extent.
Okay. Uh, Let me come back to Fawad, because, well, speaking of allies, I guess, China has said that the U.S. blockade of Iran's ports is dangerous and irresponsible. Chinese ships are still more or less getting through. Do you expect China to remain neutral if this blockade, the U.S. blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, actually does affect profoundly China's economic and security interests?
We don't know. They make their own decisions. We don't need the Chinese to fight the Americans. We can do it on our own. We have been doing it for the last 40 days. We have Europeans, other countries condemning Trump for starting this illegal war. People in the Spanish Prime Minister, others, the German Chancellor. This is an illegal war, and countries don't want to be associated with an illegal war. Last week, when the Strait of Hormuz was open under Iranian management, we had a French ship going through the straits. It was carrying fertilizers. When the French had a choice between Trump and fertilizers, they chose fertilizers. And I have some good psychologists' number in Tehran for relatives of Miss Makki. Human beings don't like to be bombed. I don't know who she's talking to in Iran. These exaggerated numbers were used to justify attacks on Iran. They were trying to demonize Iran so they could help Trump engage in this illegal war. Iranians don't like to be bombed. Even the people who don't like the government don't want to send their children to a school and not see them again. They don't want the local hospital to be attacked. So it's sickening to hear these things from the other side.
Amanda, what if this is indeed Trump's feared forever war? Where does that leave the United States? Where does it leave the administration? Where does it leave your friends and family in Iran?
Well, friends and family in Iran definitely don't need a psychologist to know. They just hung a wrestler who was, I don't even think he was 21 years old. That's what this regime does, because if you oppose it, they are going to hang you, just as they have about 80% of the people
Not
that
true.
they
That's a lie.
prosecute. So this is a regime that needs to be gone. 47 years too long that they've been in power. And even Keir Starmer yesterday, these countries may not want to engage in war, but they know the ills and the dangers of this regime. Now, that said, the people in Iran, just as an example of what my cousin said, he said in Israel, people will go hide in bomb shelters. In Iran, we record it because we're hopeful that maybe something will change in this country. The inflation, the oppressive human rights violations, everything about this needs to go. Now, with regards to the United States, as I mentioned before, the United States does not want to fight wars in other countries for no reason. They believe that Iran is a existential threat. Now, again, the timeline that I mentioned that President Trump spoke about early on, 4 to 6 weeks, there is a set time when Americans are just going to tire of being involved in wars on other fronts. And so this is important. And I think that's why you see the diplomacy happening. That's why you see what happened in Islamabad. They're talking about another rounds of talks on Thursday, possibly as early as Thursday. So diplomacy is important. And that's why you have these other countries engaged with Iran and with the United States to say, let's get everyone to the table. Let's see what happens. I'm hopeful. But when a country that has been chanting death to America for
Okay.
47 years, I'm not sure they're going to change their mindset or not move the goalpost as we have seen them do so often.
Okay, Fawad, I can see you disagree with every point, but I want to stick with our topic here being the Strait of Hormuz. Let me come back to the Colonel because we've also seen, we talked a little bit about, what China gets out of this or doesn't get out of it. There's also the question of Russia, which is supposed to be an adversary of the United States, but now many are saying Russia actually wins here because it seems there's now an extension again on the sanctions oil waiver for Russia, and Russian oil exports actually hit $19 billion in March. They're making more money than ever. They also volunteered to take Iran's uranium off its hands if that would help in the nuclear negotiations to keep the stockpiles safe. Is any of this the outcome that the U.S. was prepared for?
No, I mean, without a doubt, obviously, I mean, allowing Russia to sell more oil is not in the U.S. interest based off of previous sanctions. I mean, to take a step back and we look at how the U.S. is going about trying to close the strait versus how Iran tried to close it. I mean, what the U.S. is trying to do is a blockade, control ships going in and out, as opposed to indiscriminately mining the straits, which leaves mines out there to hit any ships out there. So you see clearly different actions in terms of the way the U.S. is trying to do it and the way Iran has done it in terms of trying to close the straits or control the straits. I mean, one obviously does not leave munitions out there to just destroy random ships, transport ships that are completely uninvolved in the conflict. But yes, it's the right. It's early to tell. I mean, this is just once again. I don't think you have to worry about this being a long war. Is it maybe going to be longer than expected by the U.S.? Yes, without a doubt. But I don't think there's any real fear of the U.S. being trapped in a forever war with President Trump.
If there's no real fear, then where does it end?
I mean, it'll end when the negotiations, when the U.S. decides it's either too costly to keep the war going, or Iran decides it's too costly to keep it going, and that's what this is. This is just consistent bargaining that you have in war. It's bargaining with force, but that's really what these actions are, back and forth throughout the recent weeks.
Well, then let me get some final words on the potential negotiations going forward to end this. Fawad, Iran actually, as I said, agreed to, a 5-year suspension of its nuclear program. And according to Trump, most of those facilities have been destroyed anyway. And the uranium supply is still there, but the program has been so badly damaged. And then we have Russia offering to take that uranium. So where do you see the nuclear negotiations going, since now the United States is saying that is the primary issue?
That's not a primary issue. If Iran's nuclear program was a concern, Trump would not leave the nuclear agreement. You cannot find any nuclear scientist that would tell you you can make a nuclear bomb out of enriched uranium that's done at 3.65%, and that was the limit that Iran was observing during the deal. He wants to take over Iranian oil. That's what he has said. And when reporters ask Trump, why do you want to take over Iranian oil? He says he's a businessman and he likes to make money. He admitted last week that he sent arms to the so-called protesters in Iran, and they used those arms to kill more than 200 police officers. The people who shoot at police officers in English, they are not called protesters. They are called police killers. They are called cop killers. And when they are prosecuted, we don't call them hanging people. Hanging young people can shoot at police, and they have to be prosecuted for doing that. They do that in the United States. They do that in other places. It's really sickening
No, we
to
don't
hear
hang
people
people.
justifying illegal war. Yes, you do. You have death penalty in a good number of states in the United States, and Iran does have death penalty. When you shoot at police, you will be prosecuted. It's sickening to hear people justifying this illegal war We lost 165 little girls.
And you'll have an
on the
actual
first day
trial,
of
not
war.
a sham trial.
We didn't hear these people condemning little girls being attacked by Tomahawk missiles. They don't care about human rights when they're little girls. This is the Epstein class. They like to rape little girls and kill little girls. And this is the people we are dealing with. And supporting the Epstein class is sickening.
Okay, that will have to be the final word, unfortunately, for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with me, our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.